Hi there, thanks for joining me right here on The Nation. I'm Jessie Chahal. Today we focus into a topic that I think a lot of us think, well, can it really be possible? We're talking about rebranding Malaysia, more so after the takeover of the new government. And as we look into Visit Malaysia year 2020, which is just a couple of months away, joining me in the studio is a special guest of mine all the way from the UK, Kubi Springer. She's a brand consultant, brand specialist, as well as a trainer. Welcome to the studio, Kubi. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Such a pleasure. This was sort of last minute as we brought you around here, but nonetheless, you've had so much of experience around the globe. Predominantly, you've worked with big names and brands such as Justin Timberlake, there's P. Diddy, Mercedes-Benz, L'Oreal, and that's just to name a few. You've been to Malaysia as well 17 times over the past 3 years, so obviously you know our local quote-unquote brand pretty well. Looking at the 2019 country brand ranking, Malaysia stands at the 45th position. We've moved up 3 spots since 2014, but 45th position is perhaps not where we want to be for much longer. What is your opinion about Malaysia as a brand?
I think Malaysia, first of all, is a phenomenal brand. I just think more people need to know about it, particularly in the West. One of the things that grabs me with Malaysia is the people. I remember when I first got here, I wasn't sure what to expect. And actually, Malaysians are so friendly and so welcoming. And I think internationally, we don't always know that. We don't always get that message coming across that actually Malaysia's multicultural, Malaysia's upmarket, Malaysia's cosmopolitan, Malaysia's a great place to have a phenomenal lifestyle. So I think in the first instance, that's the message that needs to come out, that the Malaysian people are what you buy into when you buy the brand.
And is that the essence of a branding campaign? What are some of the main features you would look at, whether it's a personal brand, commercial brand, or more so a national brand? What are some of the driving forces?
Well, as a brand consultant, what we first look at is what is the essence of the brand? What is the heartbeat of the brand? What makes it uniquely different to something else? So if you take the UK as an example, the essence of the UK brand is the royal family. It's quintessentially British. So irrespective of what might happen in politics, we've got Boris just come in, irrespective of what might happen with the political movement, what people remember is the royal family as it comes to the brand. So you always think, well, what is the essence of one's brand? And then the second thing is, what are we promising? What are we actually promising people when they come to Malaysia, or what are we promising when they engage with this particular organization? And it's never what appears on the surface. So if you take, America as an example, the brand promise is that you can make it happen. Anything is achievable. If you take the British promise as an example, the promise is that you can rise to the top. You can become quintessentially British. You can become proper. So it's like, what are you promising? You're not promising, in our case, the London Eye or the Big Ben. That's just an attraction, but it's not necessarily a brand promise. Promise is about an experience.
Okay, so it's perception, it's values, it's essence of the people, it's something unique as well.
Yeah, and it's an experience.
Yeah. So what do you feel Malaysia can really sell? Because of course we are on the brink of Visit Malaysia year 2020. That's just a couple of months away. And with the new government takeover as well, there's sort of a reshaping going on, sort of a refreshed perception of the new Malaysia. What do you think we can do to further enhance the campaign of Visit Malaysia 2020?
I think there's a couple of things. I think one, there's a lot of discussion at the moment around the logo.
Yes.
I think we need to move past logo design and graphic design.
You say a brand is not a logo?
No, a logo is a brand design. It's a component necessary for the brand, but by definition, a brand is an emotional connection with your target audience. So if you think about any brand that you love it because you're thinking about it not from your head but from your heart. It's why we go into shops as women, we come out with more shoes than we need, right? We're not going in thinking about the shoes, we're going in feeling something. So when it comes to Malaysia, what I would say, what I've loved so much about this place is really the experience that I can be in KL 1 minute and it's cosmopolitan and there's beautiful food, and the next minute I can be at phenomenal beaches within 3 hours. How many places do I get that experience around the world that's also so open to so many different cultures? So what I would look at is actually What is the essence of this brand? What is the experience that we believe people will have? What is the lifestyle that you will get when you come to Malaysia? And that's what I would package and bottle up.
But you also say that branding, there is a science. There's a science behind it.
There is. There is. So people think that branding is creativity. You know, when I'm engaging with clients, so for example, right now I'm engaging with Facebook, right? So I'll go into a strategy meeting and people will say, well, let's talk about colors and logos. And I'm like, before we get to colors and logos, let's talk about values. Let's talk about essence. Let's talk about brand promise. Let's talk about mission. What do we stand for? Let's talk about vision. Where are we going? Once we have all of those strategically in place, then the creativity just brings it alive. But if you start with logo first, without knowing the mission or the values or the vision, then you end up with just a logo that not everybody understands.
So from your observation, from your time that you've been here, past I think two weeks now, and you're
Yes.
off in a couple of days, do you feel that the Visit Malaysia 2020 brand strategy is on point, or do you think we're focusing too much on logo and color as well as the tagline, which obviously is under a bit of controversy right now because it reads Visit Truly Asia Malaysia 2020, which you say on site, as someone reading it as well, it is incorrect.
Well, I don't know if I'd go as far as to say the word incorrect. I would say what would be the interpretation for someone who is a tourist coming over. If I look at that, what am I perceiving? What am I reading? What am I actually getting from it? And I think the discussion is in the wrong place. The discussion shouldn't be about the strapline. This discussion should be about what are our values? You know, what is the experience? When somebody goes on to Malaysian Airlines, what are they going to experience? What food are they going to taste? When they go into the airport, who meets and greets them? So a classic example, when you go to the Bahamas, everybody knows the Bahamas is about fun, right?
I'm already thinking beach,
fun,
pina colada.
absolutely. The minute you get off the plane, you've got somebody in the airport and you're hearing music and you are experiencing fun the minute you get off the plane. So straight away, you're encapsulated by the brand. So I think the focus really needs to be on how do we bottle that up.
Okay, let's talk about MAS, Malaysia Airlines. Obviously, under a lot of scrutiny, and right now, you know, we don't even know if MAS as an entity will exist any longer or whether it will be invested by someone else. What do you feel MAS can do, for example? That's a strong local Malaysian brand. It has been for decades as well, but now obviously it needs to fine-tune.
Yes, yes. I think that, you know, if we look at what Emirates has done as an airline, they've invested quite heavily on showing people not that we're an airline that takes you from A to B, but we're an airline that supports your needs. So the million-dollar question is, what is the need of the tourist? When the tourist is traveling, whether it's in economy or whether it's in first class or business, what are their needs, and how do we project that Malaysian Airlines supports that? How do we show international people experiencing Malaysian airline in all its positivity? I've flown on Malaysia Airlines lots of times. The food is phenomenal. So how do we bottle that up? And that will help to take away from some of the controversy and reintroduce a new message.
What happens to a strong brand like MAS, for example, when something happens, when something goes wrong? How do they rebrand if they can, or how do they come up with, you know, a new perception?
I think first of all, when I work with clients, I always say honesty is the best policy. Consumers are too savvy for you to pretend as if something didn't happen or try and sweep it under the carpet.
Right, also now with social media.
Absolutely. And social media has, you know, digital has no respect for boundaries, which means that if you post something today in KL, I'll see it tomorrow in London, right? In fact, I'll see it in 7 hours.
Yes, and that also forms a global perception. So
Yes.
whether that's really what's happening on ground or not, whether it's, you know, in line with the authorities locally or the incidents that have taken place, there's already a perception that's being formed miles across the
Absolutely.
country.
So you need to control the narrative. And one of the ways to control the narrative is to, first of all, have the processes in-house where you already know what you will do if the brand goes wrong. So you already have PR processes in place. Who's going to be our brand ambassador? What are our key messages? And how do we honestly approach the crisis? Honesty is key, because if you're not honest, then all of a sudden people become dubious. If they're dubious, they stop trusting. The second thing is, how do we get in front of the message so that social media and viral doesn't take the message away from us? And I think that's the key lessons to learn from what happened with Malaysia Airlines, which is actually we need to get in front of the message very quickly and own the narrative. But now that it's happened, the rebranding process is not easy, but it's not impossible. And what I would say is that right now it's about painting a different picture. Right now it's about painting the true picture. Like I said, I'm from London. I travel Malaysian airline. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. Let's create that. Let's package that. Let's promote that.
Branding is also, as you mentioned, very heart-centric. So it's about feelings and emotions as well as the experience. And all that comes from sort of a non-scientific point of view. Like it's how I feel, or what vision I have as I'm going to a destination or as I buy a brand. How can we sell this to Generation Y, Generation Z? That's mainly the conversation right now. How do you monetize a brand based on what makes it interesting to this segment of people?
Well, first thing I'd say is that emotions is scientific, because you've got the psychology of the consumer. So when I work with clients, the focus is less on creativity in the first instance and first on understanding the consumer. How do you study the behavioral patterns of your consumer? How do you study the needs? How do you study the feelings, the psychological well-being, the psychological thought process of your consumer? It is all science, because human beings behave in a particular way. Our job as marketeers is to study that behavioral pattern and then to say, how do we as the brand then tap into that desire and that need once we've studied it? Once you do the two, you've got magic. The customer thinks, oh, I'm just feeling this. I just like Louis Vuitton. No, actually, Louis Vuitton have studied you.
They know exactly what you like.
They know exactly
and
what you like.
So when we zoom out into a national branding campaign, looking at an international brand image, what are the things that can be done, and what are some of the examples that you could share?
So I think a really classic example is the American brands at the moment, right? Donald Trump and the American brand. I think that the American brand, whilst it's going through transition, the essence is still the same. And the essence is, if you come to America, you can achieve anything. Now, whether you like the politics of Donald Trump or not, that essence still remains the same. And I think it's imperative for brands, and bringing it back to Malaysia, to say, what is the essence of the Malaysian brand as a country? Let's not get into arguments about which parties in politics, arguments about logos and straplines. Those are minutiae conversations.
Right.
The real conversation is, what is the essence that we want to package? Because irrespective of who comes in, that essence needs to stay true.
Well, but now they say that branding is no more, as you mentioned, about logos or about an icon that you put out, but it's more about selling the promise of a good quality of life, a good eco experience perhaps. Is the country healthy from a business environment point of view? Is there freedom of speech? And this seems to be the new narrative now.
Yeah, it's the new narrative, and one of the ways to be able to effectively do that is to look at who are your key exports, not what are your key exports, but who. So if we think about the UK as an example, David Beckham and Victoria Beckham are phenomenal export for Great Britain, the brand. If you think about Manchester United and the football players, they're great export for Britain, the brand. So the key with a brand like Malaysia is to say, well, actually, how do we invest in the next generation? You've got phenomenal designers. Somebody like Min Pakita, for example, 3 young female designers from Malaysia, all sisters. They launched at London Fashion Week. They presented Malaysian design in such a professional and phenomenal and stylish way that needs to be backed, because that is your Gordon Ramsay, right? That is your David and Victoria Beckham. Someone like Chef Juan, his food is phenomenal. How do we back that and say, this is a part of our export to change the perception of the Malaysian brand?
Okay, so this begs the question now. A lot of brands go to social media and use social influences, but a lot of times that cannot translate well into representing the brand as well, whether it's a product or a service, or more so here to pick influencers that can really represent the nation. Also, with Instagram going in now, choosing not to feature likes anymore, that's going to change the landscape as well. So how do we move forward in terms of using social media as a tool, but not just relying on influencers?
Well, I don't necessarily say that if we were branding Malaysia, the country, that we look down the influencer route. What I'm saying is that we look down the ambassador route. So somebody like Chef Juan, he's not just an influencer, he's a genuine chef that's phenomenal at what he does. How do we support that? How do we get behind that? And all great brands have done that, whether it's Macron from Paris, or whether it's the Beckhams from Great Britain, or whether even the Obamas for America. America needed a shift in perception fashion. That's why the Obamas worked for them. So it's about saying not only what do we do from a product or service perspective, but who represents us effectively.
And what if we don't use social media influencers? What if we used the Malaysian people, because there's so much of heart and soul in them,
Absolutely.
as you say. Yeah, and we can sell that.
Yeah, the real stories of real people, like the
Yes.
3 girls, Mimpakita, 3 young sisters. What is their story? How have they now managed to be able to do London Fashion Week and sell in London? And I think the key here is to remember that when it comes to brand marketing, it's a multifaceted approach. Not one thing rules. You know, people say to me, what's the magic thing? And I'm like, there's no magic thing. It's a multiple of different channels that assist you to get to the end goal. And it takes time.
Yes. So what is that cycle like? When you begin to sell a brand till the time you can actually translate into, you know, good commercial value?
Well, first of all, let's look at brands that we recognize and know, okay? Walt Disney has been going for 150 years. If you think of even the most savvy tech brand has still been going for nearly 20 years, Facebook. So branding takes time, and a lot of people want quick fixes when it comes to brands, and it doesn't work like that. You know, if we take even the Visit Malaysia 2020, that process, in my opinion, should have been happening from 2000. That whole generation of how do we build this to then get people to say we love this has to take place way before the end date. So I think that's the very first thing, is actually changing perception that this isn't a quick fix. It does take time. The second thing is recognizing the cycle of branding. So you have an introduction of the brand, you have a teaser, that's where you're getting people titillated about the brand, you have the launch of the brand, you have the cementation of the brand, you then have the loyalty of the brand, and then you have recognition of the brand. And recognition is when you get to Disney status or Coca-Cola. But those brands have been going for 100+ years.
Okay, so many questions to ask you here.
Ask away.
Yes, we see brands flying off the shelves, right? Sometimes, of course, again via social media. Some brands spring up overnight, and you see perhaps a viral video go on, and you're like, oh yeah, this is a brand. But that, you say, is not sustainable.
They're not brands. So brands is an emotional connection with your target audience that has sustainability, that drives profit. A lot of those viral activities are not driving profit. They're just great viral activities. It's something fun that people like in the moment. Doesn't necessarily translate to commercial sustainability. So I think when you're looking at brand, what you're looking at is how does our brand strategy impact the bottom line, whether that bottom line is tourism or profit margins for products and services, and how are we going to ensure that that is sustainable over generations, not just a couple of years.
Also, with big brand names, for example, like the soft drink brand you just mentioned, a lot of times as well, especially the newer generation, they want to look at how authentic the brand is, how accountable, how reliable, and how responsible the brand is. So a lot of times, sometimes misrepresentation with the ingredient of a certain product or what they're doing on the ground in terms of whether it's just destroying the environment, that will not resonate. So if a brand goes awry or goes down the wrong path, how and what should be done, and how can they bring it back to align with, you know, what the people want?
Well, I mean, if we take a brand like Starbucks, okay, so Starbucks had all this controversy that happened in America. What did the CEO do? Came up front and said, hands up, we made a mistake. Came in front of the narrative. And remember, branding is an emotional connection with your target audience. So if the customer can see, actually, you're owning up that as an organization that's made up of people, that you made human error or genuine mistakes, and that actually you've got process in place to fix it, people will respect that. They'll go, oh, actually, you know what? I'll listen to you. Let me watch and see what's going to happen next. Versus acting as if you made no mistake or it didn't really happen. So I think it's imperative to understand that you are absolutely right. The next generation want a holistic approach when it comes to branding. They also want honesty and transparency. And so brands need to do that. And then the second thing is co-create with your customer, co-create with the end user. Whether you're using social media to do that or whether you're using TV stations like this to do that, co-creation is everything, because then the next generation who are all about feeling empowered, they will feel like they have an ownership of the brand. So let's take it back to brand Malaysia. How do we turn to the young people of Malaysia and say, actually, what do you want to see? What do you want the legacy to be for your children and your children to come? And co-create that message with them. The premise of top down, those days have died with the dinosaurs.
Yeah, exactly. So obviously we need to revisit the drawing board and see exactly where we've, you know, how we can realign our brand as a nation as well. how do you measure success of a brand?
So first of all, there are multiple ways to be able to measure success. There are some marketeers that say, oh, you know, marketing and sales, they're two different things and you can't measure. You absolutely can. So the natural thing to look at is the commercial increase or the commercial sustainability. But then with digital, you're looking at your digital footprint, your brand impressions, you're looking at your engagement, you're looking at customer retention. There's something called a net promoter score. A net promoter score is if I left the room, how likely are you from a scale of 1 to 10 to actually promote me if I'm not in front of you? Because we'll all say, oh yeah, I love you when you're there. But actually if I left the room, how is my net promoter score? So there's multiple ways to be able to measure the effectiveness of your brand marketing and to tweak as you go along.
I know what we're talking about, national branding or branding of the nation. People are also wondering, well, what can I do about my personal brand? And what are some tips you could share with, kind of getting that right? Because a lot of times it's like, well, who am I? What do I stand for? And as with social media as well, again, you have this amazing platform to have your own individual brand.
I think the first thing when it comes to personal branding and business branding is first of all to appreciate that the science is still the same. So right at the top when we were talking, I was saying that branding is an emotional connection and there's a science, there's a formula to it. So study what that formula is, even if you're a personal brand. Take the time to invest in you. There's a phenomenal statistic out that says 80% of recruiters will now not see a potential employee unless they have a digital footprint.
Really?
80%. That's phenomenal, crazy, right? Yeah, absolutely. So personal branding is no longer a should I have, it's a must have.
And what about having that human connection? Do brands still need to have that sort of physical on-ground activation, on-ground activities and have that interaction, or can everything now happen in the digital space?
No, again, it needs to be 360. So branding's not one thing. You do need online because people want convenience and speed, but you do need people offline for that emotional connection. To be able to sell your brand effectively, you need both.
So what can the nation do to rebrand? Do we need a rebranding, or just do we need to solidify and make our existing branding more aggressive? Because while Malaysia has a few boo-boos here and there, I must admit overall we have had a pretty strong branding campaign.
I think Malaysia doesn't need a rebrand because there's nothing to rebrand. I think Malaysia needs to celebrate the brand and needs to be aggressive in marketing that brand. If you think about the international market, particularly in the West and Europe, the UK and the US, it's relatively cheap for us to get here. It takes, only a few hours and it's relatively cheap. So there is a market out there ready.
But that just seems from a travel point of view. But what about from all the other aspects in terms of, dynamic investment strategies? We've got, great integration between race and religion here in Malaysia as well. We've got great foreign policies. How do we up that?
I think it's about, first of all, celebrating it, owning it, making the young people have ownership of it, because they're the one on social media. They can spread this quicker than anybody else. We talked about viral. How do we get the next generation to buy into brand Malaysia and use their platforms to get the message out there, as well as traditional marketing? And I think it's also about getting on the same page and not arguing about the nuance of a strapline, but actually celebrating the culture.
But I just can't see how we can translate that into a multifaceted, for example, campaign. Does perception and brand go hand in hand, or does one come after the other? Because sometimes before we go to perhaps a country, we have a certain perception. We get there and it's completely different from what the representation may be. So how do we bridge that gap?
Well, I think first of all, we need to be clear on what is the brand. Secondly, we need to do a customer journey mapping. If somebody is coming to Malaysia or if somebody is in Malaysia, are they really experiencing what you say on the tin? And that's really important to have that honest dialogue. If excellence is something that we represent, am I really experiencing it? If multiculturalism is what we say, am I really experiencing it? So I think we need to have that honest dialogue in Malaysia and then look at how do we then package that to the external market.
So Malaysians as a whole, we have a unique identity. We've got a strong identity as well. But a lot of times we feel that by embracing other identities or other cultures, it makes us a little bit more perhaps cooler or more acceptable. How do we feel proud about our own identity and use that as a as a branding mechanism?
I always say that brand differentiation is based on your truth. So if you own who you are, others will love who you are. If you pretend as if you don't want to be who you are, others will agree with you. So Malaysia as a brand needs to say this is who we are and be super proud of it, because actually it's phenomenal.
Yeah.
I don't if I want to get an American experience, I go to America. If I want a British experience, I go to Britain. If I want a Malaysian experience, I come to Malaysia. So own that and be proud of it.
Yeah. You also have a book coming out in October, just a couple of months away.
Yes.
I Am My Brand. Tell us about that.
So I Am My Brand is predominantly targeted at women. I always say that, statistic has proven that the biggest emerging market globally is women. Women are coming into more money, they're becoming more entrepreneurial, they're traveling the world. And so I Am My Brand is saying specifically to women, how do you as a female in a very male-dominated business world position your brand effectively? What does that look like? And so that's what the book is about.
Yeah, because sometimes we feel a little bit apprehensive to put out our weaknesses
Yes.
or our soft spots out there, and
Yes.
we use that, we mask that with social media and how everything looks pretty on an Instagram or Facebook.
Yeah.
But we fail to actually feature what our strengths can be as well.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, there's a group that I'm working with, a group of Malaysian CEO women that are coming to London. And the whole premise, this is in September, and the whole premise that we're working on is actually your vulnerability is your strength. What makes us different to men is the nurturing ability that we have, the vulnerability that we have. That's our strength. Now, actually, how as women do we own that? If you happen to cry at the end of work because you've had a stressful day, it's okay. You're a woman. Own it and bring that strength into the workplace. Don't assimilate to be a man. You can't.
Fantastic. Very quickly, Kubi, what would your advice be to Malaysians watching nationwide on how they can have perhaps a stronger personal brand, if it's a commercial brand, or even how we can work towards together building a better national brand?
I would say 3 things. Number 1, own your true authenticity. Number 2, define your brand, or the world will define it for you. So get in front of the message. And number 3, be clear on what the commercial targets are, personally, company-wise, or nationally, and make sure your brand drives those commercial targets.
Fantastic. It's been a pleasure having you, and it has been an enjoyable chat as well. I hope as our audience you've enjoyed that chat as we zoom into Visit Malaysia 2020 and what we can all do as a collective to build a better brand for our nation. That's all the time we have. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.